Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to talk about nose development. So let's start our topic with introduction. Nose develops from frontonasal and maxillary prominences during early embryogenesis. Its formation involves the development of nasal placodes, nasal pits, and nasal sacs, which eventually form the external nose, nasal cavities, and olfactory epithelium. Proper fusion of these structures is essential for normal facial development, and failure of fusion can result in congenital anomalies like cleft lip or choanal atresia. Embryonic origin of nose includes ectoderm that form the epithelium of nasal cavity and olfactory epithelium. Embryonic origin also includes mesoderm and neural crest cells that form cartilage, bone, and connective tissue of the nose. Third embryonic region of nose is embryonic ectodermal placodes that form olfactory receptor cells. Timeline of development of nose. It starts from week 4 when nasal placode appear as a bilateral thickening of surface ectoderm on the frontonasal prominence. Then there is week 5 in which nasal placodes invaginates to form the nasal pits, and these nasal pits are surrounded by medial and lateral nasal prominences. Then there is week 6 during which nasal pits deepens to form the nasal sac, and nasal sac during this time are separated from the oral cavity by the oronasal membrane. The fusion of maxillary prominences also occur during this week with the medial nasal prominences and that form the upper lip. Then there is week 7 during which oronasal membrane ruptures thus create the primitive coni. Primitive coni is nasal opening into the primitive oral cavity. During this week, there is also formation of primary palate begins from the intermaxillary segment. Then there is week 8 to 10. During this time, nasal cavity elongate posteriorly as the palate develops, thus separating the nasal and oral cavities. Secondary palate formation also occur during this period that further separates the nasal and oral cavities. Then there is week 10 to 12. During this time, there is differentiation of nasal conchi and paranasal sinuses. The olfactory epithelium also developed during this time from the ectoderm of nasal placodes. Now let's talk about formation of structures related to nose. First we have is external nose. It is formed by fusion of medial nasal prominence and lateral nasal prominence. Medial nasal prominence form the bridge of nose and philtrum, and lateral nasal prominence form the slides of the nose. Maxillary prominences form the lateral part of the upper lip and cheek. Then there is nasal septum that develops from a downward growth of the frontonasal prominence. This joins the developing palate to separate the nasal cavity into right and left chambers. Next structure related to the nose is nasal cavities. There are nasal sac that deepens and expands posteriorly, thus forming the nasal cavities. There are posterior coni that open into the nasopharynx after secondary palate formation. Then fourth structure related to nose is nasal conchi that are outgrowth from the lateral wall of nasal cavity, and they develop into superior conchi, middle conchi, and inferior conchi. Fifth structure related to nose formation is paranasal sinuses that develop as a diverticula from the nasal cavity walls during the late fetal life, and they expand postnatally. Sixth structure is olfactory epithelium that is derived from ectoderm of nasal placodes, and olfactory receptor neurons remain in direct contact with environment, thus forming olfactory nerve that is cranial nerve number 1. Now let's talk about the clinical significance of nose development. First, there may be choanal atresia, that is failure of breakdown of oronasal membrane and that lead to blocked coni. It presents with difficulty breathing in the newborns. Second clinical significance is cleft lip and palate. It is because of failure of fusion between medial nasal and maxillary prominences that cause cleft lip. And they may be because of failure of palatal shelf to fuse that cause cleft palate. Third significance is nasal septal deviation. This is abnormal growth of nasal septum during development. And fourth significance is agenesis of paranasal sinuses, that is rare failure of sinus development. Now let's talk about conclusion of this lecture video. Development of nose is complex process involving ectoderm, mesoderm, and neural crest cells. Precise fusion of facial prominences and breakdown of membrane is essential for forming functional nasal passages. Disruption in this process lead to congenital anomalies like choanal atresia, cleft lip, and cleft palate. And this was all about nose development. Hopefully you liked the video. If you do, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment. Thank you for watching.